Hello my dear friends, you're in the Military with Summary channel, and in this video we're going to discuss the most important events that took place during the previous 12 hours. We have lots of very interesting updates, so let's start. And during this video we're going to discuss another massive missile strike and drone strike that took place during the previous night all over the entire territory of Ukraine, and according to information we have, that was a new anti-record. The Russians used the biggest number of drones and missiles ever. Furthermore, during this video we're going to discuss the changes on the ground, because during the previous 12 hours the Russians once again managed to improve their position significantly. Furthermore, according to the Syrsky, according to the Commander-in-Chief of the Armed Forces of Ukraine, the Russians opened a new direction, and we are talking about the city by the name of Dobropolska. So very interesting. So let's start and let's begin everything in details. And first let's talk about the massive missile and drone strike that took place during the previous 12 hours. This morning the Ukrainian sources published this picture where we can see the approximate routes of Russian attack. As you can see, the entire territory of Ukraine is covered with these lines, with yellow lines, with red lines, with blue lines and green lines, and with orange lines. Every single line means a missile or drone that's heading towards another strategic position or temporary deployment point of Ukrainians. Lots of explosions took place during the previous nights, and the most interesting is that the biggest number of explosions were recorded in the western part of Ukraine. We're talking about the city of Lviv and the vicinity of the settlement. Furthermore, lots of explosions were recorded in the central part of Ukraine. We're talking about the oil refinery plant. We're talking about this area, Kremenchuk oil refinery, and that was not the first time when the Russians attacked this territory. Since the beginning of June, the Russians carry out at least two massive strikes exactly in this area, and as a result of previous attacks, lots of fuel depots, oil depots were destroyed by the Russians, and this is very important during Russian offensive operation in the Donbas direction. Furthermore, when talking about this map, we see that there were lots of explosions in the city of Nikolaev, in the city of Dnipro, and I would like to point your attention that for the first time, probably since the beginning of June and since the beginning of any massive missile strike all over the entire territory of Ukraine, we haven't received anything from the city of Kiev. According to this map and according to sources, according to information we are receiving from the open sources, we haven't received anything regarding the situation in Kiev. So for the first time, the Russians decided to avoid Kiev and to move further in the western direction and in the southern directions and in the direction of the central Ukraine. Furthermore, according to information we have, the Russians used a significant number of drones and missiles. The Ukrainian sources reported that during the previous night, the Russians used around 537 drones and missiles altogether. So the biggest number ever since the beginning of the special military operation. The Ukrainians reported that they managed to destroy and to bring down 436 out of 477 drones, and the Ukrainians managed to bring down 39 missiles out of 60 Russian missiles. So as we can see, the results according to numbers are good, but when talking about real numbers, we see that even with these statistics, the Russians managed to damage and to destroy lots of facilities and objects of the Ukrainian armed forces. Especially very interesting that Ukrainians haven't managed to bring down even a single Kinzhal. So the Russians used 4 of them and Ukrainians haven't managed to bring any of them. And the Russians shown us very good statistics regarding the use of Iskander M missile. So just 1 missile out of 7 was destroyed by Ukrainians. And of course, during the previous nights, we were receiving lots of updates, lots of videos and pictures of how Russian missiles were flying above the territory of Ukraine over their targets. We could see lots of videos with explosions all over the entire territory of Ukraine, especially in the western part of Ukraine. I would like to remind you, it's the biggest attack since the beginning of the special military operation, but the Ukrainians are trying to hide as deep as possible pictures and videos of damage that the Russians managed to deal. They show us just those pictures that they couldn't, that Ukrainian services couldn't hide from people and from different sources. Furthermore, we got a very interesting report about use of Ukraine air defense forces. As you may know that the Ukrainians used not just air defense systems like Patriot or Gepard or IRC air defense systems. The Ukrainians also use F-16s to bring down Russian missiles and drones. And according to Ukrainian authorities, during this massive attack, the Ukrainians used lots of F-16s aircraft with the purpose to support their air defense forces. And as a result of night battles, battle, the Ukrainians lost one of their F-16s and the pilot. He haven't managed to capitulate. So this is, as you can see, very, very huge loss for Ukraine and for the armed forces of Ukraine. Anyway, let's wait and see what is going to be next. But obviously, the next thing that the Russians are going to do, most likely they will repeat this massive strike. They will repeat this massive missile and drone strike because the Russians, first of all, want to the beginning of the third round of talks between Russia and Ukraine. This is the first reason. And the second one is that the Russians are at a very, very powerful offensive operation, and they need to support their forces on the ground with massive missile and drone strike on Ukrainian rear positions, and their ammo depots, warehouses, and many, many other important, let's say, facilities that Ukrainians use to supply their forces along the line of combat contact. And now let's talk about the line of combat contact, and we have lots of very interesting updates. And first, let's talk about the city of Vovchansk. I pointed your attention several days ago that something interesting started in this area, and I would like to remind you once again how the situation was developing in this area. And the first report that we got is this video. This video was published on the 25th of June of 2025, and this is exactly and most likely the moment when the Russians began their offensive operation with the crossing of the river Vovchansk. And this video show us how Ukrainians were trying to prepare trenches and fortifications above the railway bridge that moves in the direction of the city of Vovchansk in its western part. And the Russians, when they discovered Ukrainians that were trying to build trenches, they attacked them with FPV drones. Later, the next day, more precisely on the 26th of June, we got this video where we can see how Ukrainians were bombing and attacking Russian soldiers, first Russian groups that crossed the river of Volcha and were trying to outflank Ukrainians above the bridge. So based on this video, we have adjusted the map. We adjusted this map on the 25th of June of 2025, on the 26th of June. Later, on the 28th of June, we got this video, and this video was published by the Group of Forces North. And in this video, we can see how Russians were bombing and attacking with all type of calibers. They have this industrial zone that is located in the western part of the city. As you can see, lots of explosions, and this is not just a regular attack, and this is not something like to do this for free. This is obviously an artillery preparation, and we made a conclusion yesterday that most likely after this artillery preparation, the Russians would begin their offensive operation with the purpose to establish complete control over this industrial zone, because who controls this industrial zone controls the entire city of Vovchansk. And this morning, on the 29th of June of 2025, we start receiving first reports and first updates about the situation on the ground and about changes on the ground. And the pro-Russian resources are the first resources that published these updates. So according to them, according to several very reliable pro-Russian resources, as a result of offensive operation, the Russians managed to establish complete control over something like this. So this huge forest was captured by the Russians, according to pro-Russian resources, and the most important, the Russians managed to secure the most northwestern part of the southern Vovchansk. So first buildings and first streets were captured by the Russians during the previous, not just 12 hours, I believe. This operation took around 2 days, but today we just start receiving first reports and updates. And the most important is that all these changes on the ground mean that the Russians most likely during the 29th or 30th of June would try to establish complete control over this industrial zone and to force Ukrainians to fall back. So we are entering the final stage of the battle of the city of Vovchansk, and most likely the Russians will finish this battle because first of all they crossed the river of Volcha, and the second thing is that they are about to capture this biggest stronghold in the western part. This is not just a stronghold, this is a very huge elevation that can be used by the Russians to control the entire city deep to the south, almost till the settlement of Vilcha. Now let's move further and let's discuss the situation in the southern Kupiansk direction in the vicinity of the settlement by the name of Redkadub. This is the southern Kupiansk direction or the Liman area. Currently, one thing we can say for sure, there are very heavy clashes between the Russians and between the Ukrainians. The Ukrainians during the previous days carried out several very successful counterattacks that allowed the Ukrainians to restore control for over around 40 or 50% of the settlement of Redkadub, and according to information information we have, the Ukrainians continue their counteroffensive. The main purpose of Ukrainians is to establish complete control over the settlement, to force the Russians to fall back, and to cut the Russians in Koldronu who are currently located along the river of Nitru. So we're talking about these three lines. This is very important counter-offensive operation, because we know that at the same time the armed forces of the Russian Federation were trying to attack in the direction of the settlement of Novy Mir, and the Russians were trying to improve their positions along this road in the direction of this dense network of the fortifications. But now we see that the Russians most likely are forced to stop this offensive, because now they need, no matter the losses, no matter the price, to stabilize the situation around the village of Redkadu, because if they can't stabilize the situation, then they will be forced to postpone their offensive operation in this area. And obviously currently the Russians are not able to postpone anything. They need to stick to the schedule and to move according to the common plan, or according to a major plan of the commander-in-chief of the armed forces of the Russian Federation. At the same time, we got reports that by the morning of the 29th of June of 2025, the Russians secured at least 50% of the settlement of Nova Zelena Dolina. This information was confirmed by neutral mappers as of the beginning of the 29th of June of 2025. We haven't received anything that can confirm this, so we will keep this area as a contested area until we get additional clarification. Anyway, if this information is correct, most likely the 60th Mechanized Brigade would abandon their positions in the very near future, and the Russians will be able to secure the settlement, which will allow them to release additional forces that can be used further in the future to stabilize the situation around the village of Redkadub as well. Now let's move further and let's discuss the situation in the Chasiv Yar direction. During the previous 24 hours, we got lots of very interesting updates. First of all, let's compare the map between the dates. So this is the situation by the end of the 28th of June of 2025, and according to different sources, the Russians managed to maintain this gap, this pocket, and the Russians managed to secure completely the Seversky Donetsk-Donbass Canal side that is located on the Russian side. Furthermore, according to information we have, the Russians managed to improve their position significantly in the southern part of the city of Vovchansk, and another micro district was completely secured by the Russians. So as for the beginning of the 29th of June of 2025, the Russians control around 90% of the city of Chasiv Yar. At the same time, we got report from neutral mappers that the Ukrainians carry out their own counter-offensive operation in the central part of the city of Vovchansk, most likely with the purpose to unblock several units that were, let's say, encircled by the Russians somewhere in the vicinity of the central part. But this is not like an attempt from the Ukrainian side to restore control over the entire city of Chasiv Yar. It's just an attempt to allow the Ukrainians to retreat from this area with minimal losses. But obviously, the Ukrainians are about to escape the city of Chasiv Yar completely without any chances or any possibilities to restore control over the city in the future. Now let's move further and let's discuss the situation in the most important direction. As for me, we're talking about the Pokrovsk agglomeration. So during the previous 12 hours, the most important and the most interesting updates regarding the situation in the ground we got exactly from this area. And first of all, it's good to start this discussion situation in the Pokrovsk direction with the article that was published by the commander-in-chief of the armed forces of Ukraine, Syrsky. Another day on a working trip to the units holding the defense in the Donetsk region. Our fighters daily repel the furious attacks of the invaders in the Novopavlovsk, Pokrovsk, Kramatorsk, Torez direction. So these are the words of Syrsky. Fighting continues, and this is the most important sentence of this huge, let's say, article published by him. Fighting continues in a new direction, Dobropolske. The Russian armed forces are rushing to Konstantinovka, but apart from numerous losses, have achieved nothing. So fighting continues in the new direction, Dobropolske. So when talking about the map, this is exactly the settlement that Syrsky, the commander-in-chief of the armed forces of Ukraine, was talking about. So he's saying that the Russians are advancing in this area, but when talking about the line of combat contact, that the combat line is too far from this area. But today we got another very interesting article published by mainly pro-Russian resources, and today pro-Russian resources made significant changes on the ground along N32 road in the direction of the settlement by the name of Novoekonomichna. Furthermore, according to numerous pro-Russian resources, the Russians managed to answer this area. So when summarizing everything that was published during the previous night, the Russians currently control something like this. So everything inside of this pocket is already under complete Russian control or about to be taken by the Russians. And this is obviously a breakthrough. This is a Russian breakthrough, and this is a breakthrough in the direction of the city of Dobropolye. So this is the settlement, and the Russians are moving towards this settlement. And it's not just about breakthrough in the direction of Dobropolye, it's also about full control and full encirclement of the entire Pokrovsk agglomeration. Because if the Russians are able to take this territory under complete control, if we have enough of proofs to color this territory in Russian favor, I'm talking about, let's say, red color and creating a polygon like this is going to be the beginning of complete disaster for the Ukrainian contingent on the territory of the Pokrovsk agglomeration, because from these positions, obviously, we see that Ukrainians were caught in cauldron. Furthermore, I would like to remind you that currently the Russians are trying to break through Ukrainian defense on the western flank of the Dobropolye direction. We're talking about the settlement of Vovchansk. Currently, the Russians are advancing in this area, and obviously we understand that the Russians will try to move further in the direction of Sergeyevka with the purpose to create the same story. They will try to take these territories under complete control, and they will try to do everything they can so we will be able to color this area as red polygon. And from this perspective, we see complete collapse of Ukrainian defense and the Ukrainian mission of the defense mission of the city of Pokrovsk and Pokrovsk agglomeration. So we see probably the beginning of a major battle of 2025, and this major battle will certainly begin after Russia established control over this territory. So let's wait and see what is going to happen here in the next few days, but obviously we are going to see lots of clashes, and the offensive actions of the Russian side will be just intensified. When talking about the Dnipropetrovsk direction, during the previous 24 hours, the Russians managed to improve their positions around villages they managed to secure during the previous days. I would like to remind you that just yesterday we got report that the Russians managed to secure completely the village of Zirka, and the group of forces East published this video where we could see lots of Russian soldiers that raised Russian flags all over the entire settlement. Ukrainians left this bank of the river of Mokre Yale, and today we got additional report that the Russians managed to secure not just the villages of Zaporozhye, Zirk and Yalta. The Russians managed to improve their positions on the Ukrainian side of the river of Volcha by taking under control the villages of Novoukrainka, Dachne, and additional true lines and fortifications on the Ukrainian side on direction to the village of Filia. So this is obviously another collapse of Ukrainian defense. Now we see no possibilities for the armed forces of Ukraine to hold this pocket. The Ukrainians will continue their evacuation and escaping towards the settlement of Novopavlovka, and we expect that in 2 weeks the Russians will begin the battle for Novopavlovka itself. Very important settlement in the Russian major battle for outflanking and taking in cauldron the city of Pokrovsk and the Pokrovsk agglomeration. When talking about the Zaporozhye direction, small changes on the ground were recorded. The Russians are moving in the western direction, but as we discussed in the previous videos, there are hundreds of villages on the way to Pokrovsk and on the way to the city of Guliai-Polye, and these hundreds of villages the Russians are going to begin fighting for in these coming days. And this is going to be a very long trip, because it will be very difficult to concentrate forces in all these villages, because most of all these villages would be destroyed and reduced to ruins. But when the Russians get the village of Guliai-Polye, the city of Guliai-Polye and the city of Pokrovsk, this is going to be a turning point in the battle for the entire Zaporozhye and the Dnipro directions. And that's it for the short video. Military Summary channel reminds we condemn any violence in the world. Thank you for your watching, subscribe to my channel, put your likes on my Patreon, and have a good day. Bye bye.